and one of the ladies here, Sheila, she's the Executive Officer of Animal Focus for us, RSPCA Queensland Incorporated. She joined the organisation in 2001 and oversees all animal-related areas, including vet services, shelter operations, customer service, foster outreach, call centre, inspectorate, I've been struggling with that one, and animal training and behaviour. She also oversees Shelter Buddy software. Now this is great. It's allowed her to work with many of the top shelters in the United States and in Canada. Through working with the shelters, she's been seeing firsthand what has and what has not worked. She is a strong advocate of building community coalitions and standardised reporting to reduce the number of animals coming into the shelters and being euthanized. So ladies and gentlemen, we are very lucky to have Sheila here, and I want you now to please put your hands together and welcome to the legend, Sheila Collecott.
Thank you everyone, and I'd just like to say congratulations to Rescue with Love tonight. I work for an organisation that has over 240 staff, and this year we're not having a gala event. And I think it got put in a too hard basket for whatever reason. And so congratulations to everybody at Rescue with Love as a volunteer group putting on such a fantastic event tonight. Thank you. It's really interesting how we all get started working with animals. And probably everybody here in this room at some point in their life has had an animal that has touched them in such a way that has probably helped lead them to where they are here tonight. That is no different from me. I often say it's amazing what our children get us into. And in 1999, my daughter said, "Mom, you've really got to help us. We've got the Million Paws walk-in. Kelly doesn't have time." So Mom went out to help for 2 weeks with our Million Paws walk in Queensland. 6 months later, and over 600 volunteer hours, I went back to work. And it was a fantastic experience. But during that time and a little bit later, I actually saw a side of the RSPCA that I wasn't really happy with. And I guess during that time as well, and I can still remember a little 9-month-old Labrador puppy coming in, and its only fault for being in a shelter was that the neighbor felt it was a vicious female because she was in season. She called the council, the dog had to come in, and me, not really understanding what happened at that time, came in the next day looking for the dog, and it had been euthanized within 24 hours. Because that's what could happen in our organization. We had a 24-hour hold, and its only reason was it was in season. At that time, I had also been a foster parent, and when I applied with the RSPCA, Mark said, "Is there anything that I should know?" And I looked at him and I said, "Yes, there is." And I said, "Well, one thing, it's not very bad. My daughter works here." And he said, "Well, that's fine." And I said, "The other thing is I put 40 cats through your system that I treated for ringworm, but unfortunately they were to be put to sleep. Ringworm is a curable disease, but it's a zoonotic disease, and in shelters it's not a good thing to have. But I said, I'll challenge any one of your vets because none of those cats have come back." So with that in mind, I was actually appointed as executive officer, which meant I was working side by side with Mark. So for about the next 5 to 6 years, I watched us continue to do what we were doing. And as we said earlier, I got a chance to work with our software, Shelter Buddy, and that allowed me to go overseas and work with some really good shelters. And what was really an eye-opener, because we didn't have it in Australia, we had breed-specific rescue groups, and we had the rescue groups like Rescue with Love, but like the little dogs. You know, a bull Arab's not very small, and we get a huge number of them in Queensland. And I walked into this shelter with probably 50% pit bulls, and that day they said, "We've got a problem. We need to transfer 44 animals out to rescue today." That blew my mind. 44 animals leaving a shelter going to rescue in one day. Now this was Central California, and where were they going? They were going to San Francisco, which was the first no-kill city in the US. So seeing 44 dogs be loaded into 2 vans and go out was a fantastic sight. But then when I got to know the shelter a little bit more, those were 44 very lucky dogs, because they took 50,000 animals in a year. 5,000 were adopted, less than 4,000 reclaimed, and that left over 40,000 animals that probably didn't get a second chance at life. So in working with Rescued with Love, I talked to Kay tonight, we've now transferred to Rescued with Love 45 dogs since starting working with them in August of 2010. So we're now 2013, so that's quite a few animals that we have sent. When we first started going and looking and working with Rescue, it was our behavior team that would send animals to rescue. Because unfortunately, sometimes in a shelter situation, you get very jaded by seeing people dump off animals that they don't want because, you know, they've got a skin condition, they've got teeth issues, they've got heart issues, they've got kidney issues. They've all got issues that could be treated. So our vets tend to look at it and say, well, if somebody's dropped them off, nobody else is going to take that animal on. So my hardest person to get to come on board to work with rescues has been my vets. The one thing that has made a huge difference in us being able to work with Rescue was Rescued with Love, because what would happen is we would send an animal to Rescued with Love. We would then get photos back of what the vets had done with those animals. Photos that my vets would look at, is that the same animal? Yes, this is what can happen. But I had worked, and we were still working in a culture whereby euthanasia was a commonplace. And I can still remember the first dog we sent to Rescue with Love. Kay contacted us to say the dog was coming to us from Redlands Pound. Could they have it? If it passed its BA, everything. And so I went to my vets and they said, are you sure they want this dog? Yes, they want this dog. So Otto came to stay with me overnight and fly to Rescue with Love on a Sunday. And when the vets saw the little dog that had really bad skin and ear problems that they hadn't diagnosed, which was really upsetting. Very, very embarrassing, guys. And they've never forgotten that, because I don't let them forget that. Otto looked fantastic. And it was those things that the vets would then come to me and say, and to this day, when we get a small breed dog in, and especially if it's got issues that they know we don't have the resources on, do you think your group in Melbourne will take them? And so, not too long ago, I think it's about April this year, we actually had 4 little dogs that needed to go to rescue. And Nikki, who's my rescue coordinator, she said, do you want me to call Kay? And she said, which one do you want me to ask her about? And I felt really bad, because we've sent some really hard cases and some very expensive cases to Rescue with Love. And I said, just tell her the ones we have and let her pick. So 3 dogs went to Rescue with Love. So, which is fantastic. But just to give you a little bit of what it's like in a shelter to go from a euthanasia rate of where 70% of your cats leave in a body bag and probably 50% of your dogs. The journey that we've made since 2009, 2010 has not been an easy journey. We've lost staff because it's really a lot easier to euthanize an animal than it is to put in the hard yard to make it healthy and behaviorally sound. But in 2009, in April, I wanted to have a meeting. Now, we were moving to a new facility in the next 18 months, and I called the meeting Moving Forward because I needed a mindset, I needed change. And in that meeting, I gave people 5 different areas that we could really make an impact on animals' lives, and how could we do it. So we went off, there was about 50, 60 people there that night, I think, and I walked away really disheartened in some ways, because when I said, how could we help enrich the lives of our dogs in our shelter, and what can we do? I got told we could give them a calm. So we went back, and for the next year, I was quite depressed about what we were doing, and that we were going nowhere. I was really concerned that my team felt that the only way that we could make a difference was moving into a new facility. And I knew that wasn't the case, because in the States I've seen some magnificent results from shelters that were little shacks. In 2011, or 2010, 2011, the floods in Brisbane started to make a change for us. Some might argue that it's not the best change for the animals of Queensland because up until that time, we were taking in as many stray animals in Brisbane as was the council. However, people didn't know that many of those animals would not leave our shelter either. We also talked to Bundaberg City Council and said that they needed to start taking responsibility for the animals in their area. The Brisbane floods and the floods in 2011, one of the things that I think it helped bring about is that we now have two of our large rescue groups in Queensland, because prior to that it was very much breed specific. And so now we do have those rescue groups, whether it's Animal Rescue Queensland, which does the Southeast Queensland, or Red Collar Rescue. And they have helped out tremendously, and they were working very closely with Brisbane City Council while we were not taking strays at our shelters. In 2011, I decided to try it again and get the staff together and see could we make a difference. This time I thought maybe moving forward wasn't the answer. Maybe they didn't get it. Maybe saving lives meant more. So we've had several meetings, and we try to have them about every 2 to 3 months, where the number of animals that we save is really important. When we moved to Wakehall, my guys thought it was horrible that we weren't taking some of the euthanasia equipment that we had used at Fairfield. We no longer did, on a Monday and a Thursday, a sort where they would walk through and just determine which animals would go to central, which is euthanasia, and which animals might go for a BA or a medical. And that process all changed. We had the move to Wakehall, and everybody thought it was great. We looked at all the figures for Wakehall, and we were doing really, really well at Wakehall. But the really important thing was, my 8 other regional shelters had really, really lifted their game. They didn't have a brand new facility. They didn't have vets that could now do bone surgery and eye surgeries, and they didn't have operating theaters. But they got on board and believed that every animal's life deserved a chance. In 2011, we really started to make a difference. The staff were really engaged. So what happens in 2012, 2013? We've continued to save lives. At our Wakehall facility, which I looked at the stats again today, 84 to 85% of our dogs leave alive. Even when we look at our cats, 79% leave alive. Moved into our new Wakehall facility, one of my vets came up and we were trying to work out our routines. We've gone from wire kennels into glass retail habitats. A lot of windows to wash. So being one of those people that helped choose glass windows that needed to be washed, I went out to work with the staff, and on a Saturday morning one of my vets came to me because Renelle, who's working with me and who's here tonight with me, had come to me and said, it's 2012. Can we do cats for 2012? I said, you can do cats for whatever you want. It's up to you. I just want to see them out the door, alive. So our cats were running at 2012. My vet came up to me and she said, do you know how disrespectful you are to the cat? And I said, no, tell me. And she said, $20.12. She said, that is just disrespectful. And I said, well, the 50 cents a leaf of bar was even more so. So she turned around and walked out, and we still do our cats at a low price. And we will look and see when our cats and our kittens start coming in. People don't want adult cats. But we've had really good success this year with our adult cats. We've had really good success with our dogs. This year we've also brought behaviors over from the USA, so that my guys are seeing a little bit of a different feel. We've brought things over, processes that maybe some say get introduced very quickly. But as the 2 girls sitting here know that January 1st, when it says no paper, January 1st, no paper, because it was 5 years prior of paper. When I keep seeing a thing come through that says euthanasia request, because this dog is not going to be good with other dogs, and they get an email back that says, I want a plane and I'll be home in 24 hours, and that dog better be alive in 24 hours. I go in and I talk to the guys, and I said, guys, I know you're doing play groups, and I know I brought that over last year, and we're just now doing play groups, but you're really doing safe play groups. I want to up the ante. I said, I cannot continue to see dogs that you say are, that you can't let off lead with another dog. How do you know you can't let them off lead? 23 dogs running in a play group, and yesterday, Pepper, who was also on the euthanasia list, and I said to the guys, it can't be that hard. I said, why is this dog on the euthanasia list? Well, just look at her toes. She's so frantic in the kennels. We'll get her out of the kennels. And so I went out with one of the guys, and he said, you know, people aren't doing this and people aren't doing that. I said, fine. We spent about 40 minutes with her, and I thought she was going to end up doing a cruise ship because she's just running like crazy. So the next morning I came in, I thought, okay, better do something a little different with her. So we did a 45-minute walk, and I laughed because there's probably not a pile of kangaroo poo that she didn't investigate. But she came back, she just flat out in her kennel, she slept all afternoon, and Pepper went to rescue yesterday. It takes the desire to want to save a life. It takes the desire and the understanding that it's going to be a lot of work. But there's not a day goes by, and we actually have an email group called Rescue. And that email group is so that whether the vets want to put an animal up for rescue, whether my behavior team want to put an animal up for rescue, whether my adoption center are seeing a behavior in an animal and they want to put it up for rescue, it all goes there. And I would say on any given week, we have what, 3 to 5 requests for rescue? Sometimes per morning. If we're really busy, we try and control our intake, because one of the things that shelters are really bad about is, and we were one of those, we felt that the best place for the animal was us. And I found that really hard when 50% of them didn't leave alive. So now, the guys will come to me, and if we're full, we phone up the people who are wanting to surrender and say, can you hold off a week or two? We stop taking animals, because we're not taking them in just to put them to sleep because of space. So you can regulate and you can control what happens with that. There will be some days that we can put up to as many as 16 animals up to rescue, because our kennels are getting full, and it's just a broadcast that goes out to rescue. These are animals that my staff just go off and pluck out of the adoption center and say, these animals are available to rescue. Can any of you take them? It's not, when we first started, it was looking at the broken ones that would go to Kay at Rescue with Love and some of the other places. Now, the rescue groups are getting my adoption animals, and it's because I need to make room. And making room isn't euthanasia. Making room is working with rescues. As Kay said, we had the big adopt out. That's something that I wanted to do for the last 2 years. And so this year, my CEO, who has been extremely supportive in all of this, said to me, he said, do you want to do your adoption event? And I said, yes, I do. So he put money in the budget this year for me to do the adoption event. And the whole idea was to bring as many rescue groups as we could. It's patterned after Best Friends' big adoption events in the US, which is a good thing from going over there from time to time to see what happens. And to have 30 rescue groups, or 27 rescue groups, come together with us that day. And the only domestic we had was between 2 people, not animals and not rescue groups, none of us were fighting. Even just seeing the way that people looked at how successful things were becoming and wanted to get on board. You know, people who had these really set ideas about how they were going to run their day. When they saw animals being adopted, and when the greyhound groups take 25 applications for dogs they don't even have. That's what we want to see. So watch that space for another 6 months, because we want to have 2 or 3 of those a year. So when you look at it, what have we done with rescue? Our rescue numbers, the number of animals going to rescue since 2009-2010 up until the end of June 2013 has increased by 217% going to rescue. That doesn't mean that we're not adopting animals out, because our adoptions have increased by 4,000 over the last 2 years. It's all about saving lives. So until a shelter has made up its mind to save lives, it will not happen. And I think one of the great things that's happening right now is I've got staff who've joined me from RSPCA New South Wales. They're talking to their counterparts saying, look what we get to adopt. We've adopted this, we've done this, we've sent this to rescue. And they're saying, wish we could do that. The groundswell will happen from the bottom of the ranks up. Because if the CEO or the leader doesn't see the benefit of it, the shelter staff will. Because the people who work in the shelters do not and did not join that organization for euthanasia. They love those animals, and any staff member in a shelter, if you just look closely at their key ring, something on their handbag, something on their belt, there's an animal tag that at some point in their life that was not their own animal, but was an animal in the shelter that they fell in love with that didn't leave alive. And those are all the things that make us go. Those are the things that keep us going every day, is being able to do that. So I'd just like to thank you for allowing me to talk to you tonight, to say how important that rescue groups are and how much they have played in the role for us in Queensland saving lives. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please, one more big round of applause for Sheila Collecott. That was fantastic to get such an insight into, well, up in Queensland, what's going on. And I'm sure Kay's eyes are lighting up right now. With, yeah. How good was that? So, ladies and gentlemen, it also